Let's go ahead and look at foreign currency exchange and foreign currency markets. When we look at any trade, let's start with a gallon of milk. When I go to the grocery store to buy milk, I have a demand curve for milk. I demand milk, and the fewer dollars per gallon that the retailer is going to charge me, the more gallons of milk I will buy. The more dollars per gallon, the less milk I will buy. That tells us our relationship with the downward sloping demand curve. On the opposite side of this exchange is a supplier, and the more dollars per gallon I'm willing to give them for each gallon, the more gallons per milk they will supply to this market. In this case here, we have an equilibrium price of $4 per gallon. 100 gallons of milk are sold each day. Now, when I go to the grocery store to buy milk, I step in and I stomp my feet and I tell them I demand milk. And I pull out my money, so at the same time that I am a demander of milk, I am also a supplier of dollars. In the dollar market, I'm supplying dollars. In the milk market, I'm demanding milk, but I'm using the money I receive, or the money I have, to buy the milk. Therefore, I am a supplier of dollars. The grocery store, on the other hand, which is a supplier of milk, is a demander of dollars. They want the dollars. The fewer gallons per dollar, that they have to give me, the more dollars they're going to buy. The more gallons per dollar they have to give me, the fewer gallons they will supply. On the opposite side of that with me is the more gallons per dollar they're willing to give me, the more dollars I'm willing to give them. So look at that on the other side. As the price of milk falls, the fewer dollars per gallon they charge, the more milk I will buy. On the other side of that equation is the more gallons per dollar they're going to give me, the more dollars I will supply. Here our equilibrium is 0.25 gallons per dollar, and I bring $400 to the market. The $400 are traded in this market. If you look at the price and quantity over in the milk market, 100 gallons of milk times 4 is $400. Therefore, in the money market, 0.25 gallons per dollar times $400 is equal to 100 gallons of milk. These are equivalent, they're just the opposite sides of the same coin. Now what happens if I demand more milk? If the demand goes from demand to D2. Now we see a change here. When we see more people go into the store to buy milk, that increases the demand for milk, and simultaneously the price of milk goes from $4 to $5, and the quantity supplied increases from 100 gallons to 120 gallons of milk. Well, when more and more people go to the store to demand milk, that means more and more people are going to the store with dollars. Therefore, they're increasing the supply of dollars out to purchase milk. More and more people supplying dollars means the price of dollars has to fall. And therefore, instead of 0.25 gallons per dollar, the price of dollars falls to 0.2 gallons per dollar. This is no different than $5 per gallon. Notice our equilibrium. First, it's an increase in the quantity demanded of milk from 400. This is an increase in the quantity demanded for dollars. This goes from $400 to $600 in this market. So they're exactly the same thing. It's just looked at from a different perspective. One is from the perspective of I'm a demander of milk. The other is I'm a supplier of dollars in that same milk market. We do the same with foreign exchange. We look at foreign currency, oftentimes you'll see it priced as dollars per peso or dollars per foreign currency, or you'll see the opposite, foreign currency per dollar. The Wall Street Journal posts both price on this. In this case here on the left, we're going to look at dollars per peso. The fewer dollars per peso you're charging me, the more pesos I will buy from you. Now remember, when I buy from a domestic supplier of something, it's one transaction. I give my dollar in exchange for whatever good or service they're selling. But if I'm going to buy something from a foreign manufacturer or foreign supplier, it's two transactions that I need. One, I need to transact and obtain their currency, and then two, I use their currency in exchange to get the product or service I want. So whenever you think of will the dollar appreciate or depreciate, ask yourself what's happening in that transaction. If we say that the incomes in one country go up and they buy more of our exports, well, think of how they have, how they're going to buy our exports. They have to obtain our currency first, which would increase the demand for it. So let's start with this peso market. Dollars per peso. Demand curve is down, is downward sloping just like it always is. The fewer dollars per peso I have to give you, the more pesos I demand. On the opposite side of that is the supply of pesos. The more dollars per peso, the more pesos are willing to be supplied in this market. We end up with an equilibrium price of 10 cents per peso, and 10 million pesos are being sold in this market. In the market for dollars, on the opposite side of this, the demander of pesos is at the same time a supplier of dollars. And the supplier of pesos is a demander of dollars. And we have our equilibrium price of 10 pesos per dollar, which is equivalent to 10 cents per peso, and we have $1 million transacted in this market. If there are 10 million pesos being sold at 10 cents, that means there are $1 million being transacted in this market. Now, what happens if, say, economic conditions are more favorable for investment in Mexico and U.S. residents decide they want to invest more in Mexican bonds, let's say? Well, in order to do that, Americans need to take their dollars, buy pesos, and then use those pesos to buy the Mexican bonds. So that's going to increase the demand for pesos. Demand increases to D2. The equilibrium price of pesos goes from 10 cents per peso to 12 cents per peso. In this case here, we say the value of the dollar appreciated relative to the peso. It cost me more dollars per peso. It cost me one-tenth of a dollar. Now it's going to cost me 12 cents per dollar for a peso. And the quantity supplied of pesos goes from 10 million pesos to 12 million pesos. Well, if I increase my demand for pesos, that means at the same time I'm increasing my supply of dollars. I am now a supplier of dollars. I increase my supply in order to buy pesos, and now we have a shift in the supply curve to what would be S2. And here the price of dollars in terms of pesos falls from 10 pesos per dollar to 8.33 pesos per dollar. And the quantity demanded of dollars goes from 1 to 1.44 million dollars. Again, whenever you think of the trade, how is it going to affect the supply and demand of that foreign currency? And then you look at the opposite for the dollar market. If the demand increases in the foreign market, then the dollar market must be the supply increases. Keep that in mind when you're looking at these. Now let's take a look at the foreign exchange. Again, remember when I purchase something from a domestic company, there's only one transaction, and that's my US dollars in exchange for that good or service. But when I purchase from a retailer in a foreign country, there's two transactions. Typically, there are two transactions. My dollar in exchange for the currency of that country, and then that currency in exchange for the good or service. So what happens to the value of the dollar relative to the Japanese yen when incomes rise in Japan relative to the US? If the Japanese incomes become greater than that in the US, what's going to happen to the value of the dollar relative to the yen? 2, what will happen to the value of the dollar relative to the yen when the Federal Reserve embarks on more restrictive monetary policy? And remember, when they embark on more restrictive monetary policy, they're taking reserves out of the banking system. Banks have less money to lend, interest rates rise. Therefore, what will happen to the value of the dollar relative to the yen when interest rates rise in the U.S. relative to Japan? And the last one is what happens when the U.S. government reforms entitlement spending, reducing our deficit. And if they reduce our deficit, it means they're borrowing less, therefore interest rates are going to have to fall. So think about what happens with these three. And we can move on now. If incomes rise in Japan relative to the U.S., imports are a normal good. So if incomes in Japan rise, that means they're going to want to import more of our goods. Therefore, they're going to buy more of our goods. In order to buy our goods, they need dollars, which means the demand for dollars in the dollar market increases. But that simultaneously means the supply of yen increases in the yen market. If the demand for dollars increases in the dollar market, the dollar appreciates relative to the yen. If the supply of yen increases in the yen market, again, the dollar appreciates relative to the yen. What happens with a restrictive monetary policy example? Well, again, since interest rates are higher in the US relative to Japan, more Japanese residents want to invest in our financial instruments, and in order to do so, in order to buy US bonds or US stocks, they have to obtain dollars. Again, the demand for dollars increases or the supply of yen increases as a simultaneous example. In either case, the value of the dollar appreciates relative to the yen. Lastly, by reforming entitlement and reducing deficits, that means the government is not borrowing as much, which means interest rates are now lower. That has the opposite of effect of the last example. Now fewer and fewer people, Japanese included, want to invest in U.S. financial assets. Therefore, they don't need our dollars as much. The demand for dollars decreases, which means simultaneously the supply of yen decreases in the yen market. The value of the dollar depreciates relative to the yen.